Hey guys, it is Mission Discover. Welcome back to another video. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about knife modifications. As an outdoorsman and someone who just wants to be resourceful in their everyday life, I almost always am carrying some sort of knife on me, most frequently a pocket knife. I have quite a few of them and they all do many different things, have different mechanisms and different materials that they're made out of, and I like them all for different reasons, but occasionally there'll be something that I wish I could change about it to make it just a little bit better suited for my use case. Whether that being changing out to a different handle material, changing to a clip that better suits my needs, or just adding a little bit of personal flair. That's where knife modifications come in. So today I'm going to show you how I completely modded out this Civivi Elementum and let you guys know if it was really worth all the hassle. With all that being said, let's get right into it. Before we get into the actual modifications, there are two notes that I want to make. First of all, if you are going to be using aftermarket parts, which are 3 of the 4 modifications that I'm going to be showing in this video, then you're definitely going to want to pick a knife that's pretty popular in the industry so that you have enough options and parts to choose from. A lot of the Civivi knives would work well. Benchmades are also a good option, and so are Spydercos. Obviously, for this video, I chose the Civivi Elementum, and there were tons of options available. Additionally, I want to make the note that if you're going to disassemble your knife, many companies don't like this and it will void your warranty. It's not true with every knife, but it's definitely something you should look at and consider if you're going to do any of these modifications. Moving into our first modification, I ended up swapping out the scales to these carbon fiber scales from Unlocked Composites. This was a pretty simple process. All I did was disassemble the knife by taking out the body screws and then disassembling all the parts in the pivot area around the blade. I then swapped out the scales from our micarta scales to the carbon fiber ones, and then reassembled the pivot and put back in all the body screws, and this is what we were left with. Our next modification was installing this 3D printed backspacer, as well as tying on a lanyard with a 3D printed bead, and this was a very similar process to the previous modification, where I simply removed all the screws and installed them, leaving us with this result. For my third modification, I added this titanium Cerakoted pocket clip. For this modification, I yet again removed some screws, then simply swapped out the part and put it all back together, and that left us with this result. For the final modification of this video, I ended up putting an acid etch and stone wash on the blade of our knife, which was much more complicated than the previous modifications. It started much the same by removing some screws and then dropping out the blade, which as you can see has some corrosion on it, which is a big reason why I wanted to do this modification, since this theoretically protects against that. After I removed the blade from the frame, I cleaned it up using an alcohol prep pad and used some nail polish that I stole from my mom to mask any areas that I didn't want the acid etch to hit, specifically areas where there's friction when the knife pivots. I then used a piece of braided fishing line to suspend this in a bottle, which I filled with this PCB etching solution. Most people use ferric chloride diluted with some water, but this PCB etching solution is essentially pre-diluted ferric chloride, so it should work just as well. After letting the blade sit in there for a little bit, I pulled it out and wiped it off, leaving us with this result. And as you can see, it wasn't completely coated. I seemingly smudged some of the nail polish over certain areas of the blade that I didn't want to. So I took some of the nail polish remover to it and recoated the areas that I wanted to make sure stayed clean, and then re-dipped it while only putting part of the blade in. This did help even it out quite a bit, but it wasn't perfect. So I soaked a small piece of paper towel in some of the acid and essentially painted on the areas that I needed to even out. And this got us to a point that I was pretty happy with. I then wanted to do a stone wash finish on the blade, which would even it out even more and hide some of the imperfections. So I filled a bottle with some rocks, soap, and a little bit of water, and shook it around for a little bit, gradually removing water as I went. And this is what our final result looked like. I then put it back in the knife frame to make sure it still flipped fine. So after a little bit of cleanup, I was left with our finished customized knife. So with all our modifications done, it's time to talk about whether this was really worth it. First of all, let's talk about the functionality of each of these modifications. Adding the new scales definitely was a benefit. They do look really, really awesome. And they also give a little bit more rigid feel than the micarta does without adding any extra weight. Our 3D printed parts definitely give the knife a cool vibe without spending too much money. And our pocket clip was definitely worthwhile as well. It goes in and out of the pocket much easier than the stock clip did. It also is super comfortable in the hand and you don't feel it quite as much as you did with the stock clip. And it also has a super cool aesthetic. And finally, our acid etch and stone wash on the blade definitely does give it a cool vibe. Helps to conceal some of the corrosion that we had on the blade and should help to protect it against other corrosion. And overall, all these modifications were definitely worthwhile and accomplished what they're meant to do. However, doing an entire knife like this and modding the entire thing costs a lot of money. And in my opinion, there is only one reason to mod the entire knife. That being, it's kind of fun to put together something that's very unique. Nobody else out there has a Civivi Elementum exactly like this. And that is kind of cool to say. However, from a functionality standpoint, it costs way too much money to mod this entire knife. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'll put up the exact price right here. And what I do know is that that is more than double the price of the knife without any modifications. From a functionality standpoint, if you really wanted to change that much about the knife, then you should have just got a different one to start with. There's so many out there to pick from and you can definitely find something super close to what you're looking for. And it should only take 1 or 2 modifications at most to get exactly what you want out of your pocket knife. So overall, this was a fun experience and all these modifications are super cool and super useful individually. But in my opinion, it's way too doggone expensive to do the entire thing. With all that being said, that's all I've got for you guys in this video. I hope this video was enjoyable and helpful to you. If that's the case, make sure to hit the like button and possibly think about subscribing if you haven't, because I've got more informational outdoor content just like this coming your way real soon. With all that being said, God bless, and I'll see you next time.